money left over from trading in, so I just figured I'd pick up some packs and thought it might be a good opportunity for me to get some tingles in for you and open some packs and talk through the cards that I get. So without further ado, hopefully you can get some good tapping in. GameStop packs have this weird paper over them that I don't know, hopefully you find it pleasing to listen to, but typically the foil wrap is all I really like hearing. Let me know if you like it or you don't. Anyway, so we have our first Throne of Eldraine foil wrap pack. My cat really likes this sound too. Drives him nuts. Alright, so let's get it open and look at the cards inside. Alrighty, so first we have Moonlit Scavengers. It costs 5 and a blue to cast. It's a Merfolk Rogue creature. When Moonlit Scavengers enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact or enchantment, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. It has 4 power and 5 toughness. I know the camera quality's pretty bad, so I can try to maybe show you these cards up close and then just put them down, but I just can't afford a really good camera at this time, so for now I guess you're just kind of stuck with this, sorry. Alright, next is Barge In. It's an instant, costs 1 red mana to cast. Target attacking creature gets +2/+2 or +2 power and +2 toughness until end of turn. Each attacking non-human creature gains trample until end of turn. Next we have Ardenvale Paladin. Costs 3 and a white to cast. It's a human knight creature with 2 power and 5 toughness. And it has an ability Adamant. If at least 3 white mana was spent to cast this spell, Ardenvale Paladin enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Next we have Mistford River Turtle. Costs 3 and a blue to cast. It's a turtle creature. Whenever Mistford River Turtle attacks, another target attacking non-human creature can't be blocked this turn. It has 1 power and 5 toughness. Next is Rosethorn Halberd. It's an artifact equipment. Costs 1 green mana to cast. When Rosethorn Halberd enters the battlefield, attach it to target non-human creature you control. The equipped creature gets +2/+1. Next we have Tempting Witch. Costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a human warlock creature. When Tempting Witch enters the battlefield, create a food token, which is an artifact that costs 2 to sacrifice. That costs 2 mana. You sacrifice it and gain 3 life. You can also pay 2 mana and sacrifice a food, and then a target player loses 3 life. That's an ability of the Tempting Witch. Sorry about that. Oh, and she has 1 power and 3 toughness. The next card is the Insatiable Appetite. Cost 1 and a green mana to cast. It's an instant. You may sacrifice a food. If you do, target creature gets +5/+5 until the end of turn. Otherwise, that creature gets +3/+3 until the end of turn. Hopefully someday soon I can afford a better camera so you can actually see what's written on these cards. Next is Forever Young. Costs 1 and a black to cast. It's a sorcery. Put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library. Draw a card. Next is Redcap Raiders. Whenever Redcap Raiders attacks, you may tap an untapped non-human creature you control. If you do, Redcap Raider gets +1/+1 and gains trample until the end of turn. It's a Goblin Warrior creature. Costs 2 and a red to cast. It has 3 power and 2 toughness. Next is Gingerbread Cabin. It's a land, a forest land. You tap it to add 1 green mana. Gingerbread Cabin enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other forests. When Gingerbread Cabin enters the battlefield untapped, create a food token, which again is a tap it for, or you use 2 mana to sacrifice it and you gain 3 life. I'm getting a lot of food token cards here. Next is Deafening Silence. It costs 1 white mana to cast. It's an enchantment. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. It's pretty interesting art there. Alright, next we have Bell of the Brawl. It costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a human knight creature with 3 power and 2 toughness. She has Menace, which this creature can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. And whenever Bell of the Brawl attacks, other knights you control get +1/+0 until the end of turn. Sorry. I want to take a look. That's actually some pretty nice art. It'd be a pretty good card to have in a knight deck. This next card I'm actually pretty familiar with. I have her in one of my wolf decks. My Garruk wolf deck. This is Savvy Hunter. She costs 1, a black, and a green to cast. It's a human warrior creature. Whenever Savvy Hunter attacks or blocks, create a food token. And then you can sacrifice 2 food tokens to draw a card. She has 3 power and 3 toughness. She can, that's also, I really like the art for this card too. She's super useful in that, I don't know if I've gone over that wolf deck on this channel, but I really like that wolf deck a lot, and using, having the ability to draw a card by sacrificing foods, and the more foods that you have, the more ability you have to the more you have to play around with. The next card is Castle Garenbrig. It's a land, and Castle Garenbrig enters the battlefield tapped unless I control a forest, or unless you control a forest, sorry. You tap it to add 1 green mana, and then if you tap 2 green mana and 2 other mana, or if you tap 2 mana and 2 green mana, you can add 6 green mana. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. Kinda looks like Bread Rock. Alright, next is a swamp basic land. So I have more than enough of those. And then lastly, we have a token, human cleric creature token with lifelink and haste. Is it 2 power and 1 toughness? So there, that does it for our first pack. Not too bad. I want to see what, I guess our rare was Castle Garenbrig, which I'm not too upset about. I think rare lands, having the rare lands, and especially a land that can come in untapped if you control another, kind of land, it's pretty nice. I think I already have a couple Castle Garenbrigs, but, it's never bad to have one more. Alrighty, so moving on to our next Throne of Eldraine pack. Got the box off. Alright, let's open it up. Okay, so our first card is Fortifying Provisions. Costs 2 mana and 1 white to cast. It's an enchantment. Creatures you control get +0/+1. When Fortifying Provisions enters the battlefield, create a food token. It's an artifact. We know what a food token is at this point. We'll create a separate pile for the 2 packs. Alright, next we have Moonlit Scavengers, which I think was the first card we went over in the other pack. 5 mana, 1 blue to cast. Merfolk Rogue creature. When it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact or an enchantment, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. 4 power, 5 toughness. Pretty interesting art. Looks like they're fishing. Next is Merchant of the Veil, which I've seen actually playing Arena recently. Costs 2 mana and a red to cast. It's a human peasant creature with 2 power and 3 toughness. He has an instant adventure where you may discard a card. If you do draw a card, then exile this card, and you can cast it later from exile. And then he has an ability which is 2 mana and 1 red to cast, where you discard a card and draw a card, which could be pretty useful in a situation where you have a hand that you have cards that you don't necessarily like, and maybe want to get some draw from your deck. Next, we have Youthful Knight. Costs 1 mana and 1 white to cast. He is a human knight creature with first strike. He has 2 power and 1 toughness. Sorry if this is all a little janky, but just working with what I have right now. Next is Memory Theft, which costs 2 mana and 1 black to cast. It's a sorcery spell. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. You may put a card that has an adventure that player owns from exile into that player's graveyard. This one has some very interesting art. Next is Fell the Pheasant. Costs 1 mana and 1 green to cast. It's an instant. Fell the Pheasant deals 5 damage to target creature with flying. Create a food token. That poor bird. Next we have Lash of Thorns. It costs 1 black mana to cast. It's an instant. Target creature gets +2/+1 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Be a pretty useful card. Especially if you want to save a defender and get rid of a creature that might be a little annoying. Ooh, I wanted this card. Alright, it's called, it's Merfolk Secret Keeper. Costs 1 blue mana to cast. It's a creature Merfolk wizard with 0 power and 4 toughness. It has a sorcery adventure where the target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then you can exile Merfolk Secret Keeper and then play it from exile later. I'm making, there's a black and blue deck I've been seeing people play against me a lot that's very difficult to play against. And I see this card a lot popping up in that deck, so I'm glad I got it, so I can actually play it. So I'm actually kind of pumped that I got this one. It's this one, and I think it's like Overwhelmed Apprentice are kind of the low mana card base of that deck, and glad I got it. Ooh, and I'm pumped I got this one. Fierce Witch Stalker, 2 mana and 2 green mana to cast. It's a wolf creature with trample. When Fierce Witch Stalker enters the battlefield, create a food token. It has 4 power and 4 toughness. This is a card that I don't have that I wanted to incorporate into my wolf deck. So I'm glad I got it. Pretty cool art too. Next is Shepherd of the Flock. It costs 1 mana and 1 white to cast. This card is really cool. I wonder if I got like a special extended art or something. It has an instant adventure where you return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. And then it says some flavor text on the right. Not all heroes carry swords. This card is sick. I mean, it has 3 power and 1 toughness. So, not particularly like a super great card, but like, I guess the instant is called Usher to Safety, and it costs 1 white to cast. It's actually a pretty useful adventure card, but like the card itself, like I wonder if I got a special art for it, or if this is just the normal art, because this looks really cool. I like this a lot. I'll let you look at it for a little while. I like that it, like the borders and everything. I haven't seen that on a lot of other cards. And all things considered, that 1 mana adventure is actually pretty dope. Because if you have, a situation where maybe you're blocking somebody and your creature's going to die from the block, I think you could probably use this instant so that no damage gets done and they get returned to your hand. We're going to set this one off to the side, so, because that's really interesting art. I just want to, have that off to the side. Alright. Next is Hypnotic Sprite. Costs 2 blue mana to cast. It's a fairy creature. It has an instant adventure that costs 2 mana and 1 blue to cast. The instant adventure is counter target spell with converted mana cost 3 or less. And then, as with all adventures, you can play this card off to the side or exile it and then play it from exile later. It has flying, and it has 2 power and 1 toughness. Next is Righteousness, which costs 1 white mana to cast. It's an instant. Target blocking creature gets +7/+7 until the end of turn. It's another, low mana but very powerful card. It could help save a blocker. And potentially get rid of, any card that could be a problem, so I like it. Ooh, this is an interesting rare. Our next card is Ayara, First of Lochthwain. I think that's right. Costs 3 black mana to cast. She's a legendary elf noble creature. When Ayara, First of Lochthwain, or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this could actually be very, very powerful in my black-white life gain deck, where I have a bunch of Ajani's Bridesmaid and a bunch of other creatures. If I get the mana to cast her, and then I'm casting more creatures from my hand, I'll buff anything I have out there that might be an Ajani's Bridesmaid, Bloodthirsty Aerialist, or anything like that. Anybody who doesn't follow Magic and doesn't understand, hopefully you're just getting tingles from me whispering, and kind of talking that out. But anyway, she has 2 power and 3 toughness, and then she has an ability where you can tap her and sacrifice another creature to draw a card. She actually could be super useful in that deck, so I actually might be using her. Looks like she was our rare. Our next card is Order of Midnight. Costs 1 and a black to cast. It's a human knight creature. It has a sorcery adventure that costs 1 and a black to cast. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then, of course, again, with adventures, you can put it into exile and then cast it from exile later. It has flying, and Order of Midnight cannot be blocked. It has 2 power and 2 toughness. And I think this is a shiny card. Again, hard to tell on my crappy webcam. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully if enough people watch, I might spring to buy a nice camera to do more pack openings and stuff like that. But this time it's not particularly worth it. But hopefully. Next is basic land. It's just a mountain, which obviously I have plenty of those. And then last, we have a food token, which I think we've gone over, but pay 2 mana and tap it, and you can sacrifice it to gain 3 life. I'm really pumped about this card. This Shepherd of the Flock. It's really, like the bordering, it's really a very cool card to look at. Looks like Craig Spearing is the artist. I really think he did a great job on that. Just so you can take a look at it again up close. What a bro, absolutely saving that lamb. That guy's no peasant. Very cool card. I might be pumped over nothing because maybe all those cards look like that, but either way, it's a beautiful card. So the first card is a card I also wanted. I'm getting super lucky. It's called Seven Dwarfs. Costs 1 and a red to cast. It's a dwarf creature. 7 dwarves gets +1/+1 for each other creature named 7 dwarves you control. A deck can have up to 7 cards named 7 dwarves. It has 2 power and 2 toughness. There are a lot of really funny, like, meme decks that include 7 dwarves in them. And I've wanted to build one in real life that has them, so this means I only need to buy 6. We'll combine some of these. Actually, you know what, before we move on, I think I'm going to put all the cards I'm potentially going to use, or cards that I like, into this separate pile. Just so that, I have everything that I potentially like and will use somewhere. I think the rest of this stuff, I mean, obviously it all has potential that I might use it someday, but so right now I don't think the rest of these are. So right now the cards that I'm looking at kind of keeping around that I might use in decks are Shepherd of the Flock, Ayara, First of Lochthwain, 7 Dwarves, Gingerbread Cabin, Castle Cairnbreak, Merfolk Secret Keeper, and the Fierce Witch Stalker. So we'll keep these guys in this pile over here, and we'll just keep that, everything else in this pile. The fodder we'll keep it in this pile over here. Alright, next we have Fairy Guide Mother. She costs 1 white mana to cast. She's a fairy creature. She has Gift of the Fae, which is an adventure sorcery, which costs 1 and a white to cast. The sorcery adventure is target creature gets +2/+1 and gains flying until the end of turn. She has flying, and she has, she has 1 power and 1 toughness. The next card is Run Away Together. It costs 1 and a blue to cast. It's an instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. It's kind of a funny art. Just like a human and a random, some sort of, maybe, earthy giant, some sort of scary, just kind of running away together through the fields. Good job. Sorry. Good job, Philip Berberin. Next we have Embereth Paladin. Costs 3 and a red to cast. He's a human knight creature. He has haste and adamant, which, if at least 3 red mana was spent to cast the spell, Embereth Paladin enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. He has 4 power and 1 toughness. For 4 mana to only have 4 power and 1 toughness is kind of rough, but, he'd be good in an aggro deck because of haste, getting 4 damage right off the bat. But the fact that it costs 4 mana to get him out is kind of rough. Next is Garenbrig Squire. Costs 1 and a green to cast. Human soldier creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has an adventure, Garenbrig Squire gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It doesn't need to have gone on the adventure first. Costs, he has 2 power and 2 toughness. It's a pretty sick Warhammer. Next is Malevolent Noble. Costs 1 and a black to cast. It's a human noble creature. He has an ability where if you pay 2 mana, you can Next is Rosethorn Halberd, which we already went over. 1 green mana. It's an artifact equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to a target non-human creature I control. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, and you equip it by tapping 5 mana. Next is Foreboding Fruit. Costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. And then it has an adamant. If at least 3 black mana was spent to cast a spell, create a food token. Guys, all about that pair. Next is Bake into a Pie. Costs 2 and 2 black mana to cast. It's an instant. Destroy target creature and create a food token. I have a couple of these already. I thought they'd be pretty good in the wolf deck, but it's kind of tough having the 2 black mana. If it was just 1 black mana and 3, if it was 3 mana and 1 black to cast, it'd be better, but that might be a little overpowered. Oh, not this card, but the next card I'm super pumped I got. Okay, so this next card is Silver Flame Ritual. It costs 3 and a white to cast. It's a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And then if at least 3 white mana was spent to cast a spell, creatures you control gain vigilance until end of turn. It's actually not so bad. Pretty useful in a Flyers deck that I have. Next is Drown in the Loch. It costs a blue and a black mana to cast. It's an instant, and you get to choose between counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in your controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. I have a blue-black deck that I'm making, actually similar to the Merfolk Secret Keeper that I already got. This card is also included in that deck, so these are 2 more cards that I don't have to buy to fill out that deck, so very pumped about it. This card I think is super, super powerful. It's 2 mana. If those are the only 2 colors I'm gonna have in the deck, and it's a lot of it focuses on discarding cards or making your opponent discard cards. So having, if you have 4 of these, you can get you can counter some pretty big, counter or destroy some pretty big problems that your opponent might be coming up with. So I'm gonna put that as the second card because I'm super pumped about that. Alright, next is Bog Naughty, which costs 3 and 2 black to cast. It's a fairy creature that has flying. It has an ability where you tap 2 mana and a black to sacrifice a food, and the target creature gets -3/-3 until the end of turn. And she has 3 power and 3 toughness. Pretty interesting ability. Next is Venerable Knight. Costs 1 white mana to cast. It's a human knight creature. When Venerable Knight dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target knight you control. She has 2 power and 1 toughness. Next is Lovestruck Beast. I've seen the Venerable Knight and this card in a lot of decks that I've played. Costs 2 and a green to cast. It has a sorcery adventure that is called Heart's Desire that costs 1 green to cast. Create a 1/1 human creature token. And then Lovestruck Beast can't attack unless you control a 1/1 creature, and it is a 5/5. So that explains why this card's so powerful. A 5/5 that you can get down within 4 turns, give or take. Especially if you have like an Arboreal Grazer who already, spits out mana, or if you have like a Paradise get his sorcery done, and then 2 to bring him into the battlefield as a 5/5. Pretty interesting card. I'm gonna put him in the main stack of cards that I have here, but he actually might be something I incorporate into a deck at some point. So our last 2 cards are pretty basic. We have a Plains card, basic Plains land. And then lastly, we have a rat token creature with 1 power and 1 toughness. It's a pretty cute rat, actually. Alright, so we're done with Throne of Eldraine. We will move on to the 1 core set 2020 pack that I got. So the first card we have here is Mind Rot, which costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards. I have a bunch of those already. Next is Inspire Charge. It costs 2 white mana, or 2 mana and 2 white mana. It's an instant, and creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Next is Befuddle. Costs 2 and a blue to cast. It's an instant. Target creature gets -4/-0 until end of turn. Draw a card. Can be probably pretty annoying to play against. Next is Blade Brand. It costs 1 and a black to cast. It's an instant. Target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. And then draw a card. Death Touch is obviously any damage that it does is enough to kill the creature that, or any damage that this creature does to another creature is enough to destroy it. So you could have a 1/1 up against a 10/10, and the 1/1 will still kill the 10/10. So it can be pretty useful. Next is Goblin Bird Grabber. Costs 1 and a red to cast. It's a goblin creature. It has a 1 red mana ability. Goblin Bird Grabber gains flying until end of turn. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with flying. It has 2 power and 1 toughness. Next is Sleep Paralysis. It costs 3 and a blue to cast. It's an enchantment aura. You enchant a creature. When Sleep Paralysis enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Next is Boneclad Necromancer. Costs 3 and 2 black to cast. It's a human wizard creature with 3 power and 3 toughness. When Boneclad Necromancer enters the battlefield, you may exile target creature card from a graveyard. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Next is Goblin Smuggler. Costs 2 and a red to cast. It's a goblin rogue creature with haste. You can tap it, and another target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. It has 2 power and 2 toughness. Next is Silverback Shaman. Costs 3 and 2 green to cast. He's an ape shaman creature with trample. When Silverback Shaman dies, draw a card, and he has 5 power and 4 toughness. Next is Lavakin Brawler. Costs 3 and 1 red to cast. It's an elemental warrior creature. When Lavakin Brawler attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each elemental you control. It has 2 power and 4 toughness. Would be pretty good in a elemental stack, like Teamer Elementals with Resin Reef and Lavakin or Leafkin Druid, stuff like that. Next is Vengeful Warchief. Costs 4 and 1 black to cast. He's an orc warrior creature. Whenever you lose life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Vengeful Warchief. He has 4 power and 4 toughness. Next is Scholar of the Ages. Costs 5 mana and 2 green to cast. It's a human wizard creature. When Scholar of Ages enters the battlefield, return up to 2 target instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. Costs 3, just 3 power and 3 toughness. Oh crap, I can see my next card, and I know that it's banned. The next card is Veil of Summer. It costs 1 green mana to cast. It's an instant. Draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end of turn. So I kind of understand why that was banned. If you ever had a green deck, this was an extremely powerful card to have in your sideboard if you played a blue-black deck or a blue or a black deck. I have a bunch of these too. Sucks. It's pretty powerful uncommon. I don't know how they thought that was an uncommon card. Then the last two cards, playable cards. Well, the last two cards are land cards. Temple of Epiphany, which is a dual land, both a blue and a red. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, scry 1. The other is Thornwood Falls, which is also a dual land. It is a green and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Both enter the battlefield. Whoops. Both enter the battlefield tapped. I don't hate dual lands, but I do think because they enter tapped, a lot of the times they can slow you down. Which is why I like those dual lands that you can pay 2 life so they enter untapped. The last card is a token card. It's a token wolf creature, which I do need more of for my wolf deck. It's a 2/2 token wolf creature. 2 power, 2 toughness. And that about does it for the packs. I do have this Jace Planeswalker deck, which, I mean, if you want to, I guess I could just open this up if you want to hang out and listen. But that does it for at least the booster packs and opening those. The reason I really got this is I wanted the Jace Arcane Strategist card in Arena. I think I already have one, but I wanted another one for one of the decks I'm building. So you might be able to see him in there, but he's Jace Arcane Strategist. He has a +1 ability, which is draw a card, and a -7 ability, which is creatures you control can't be blocked this turn. And then he has another ability here. It looks like whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, which would be pretty powerful in a lot of decks. And obviously with his +1 ability, you're always drawing a second card each turn. So it's like, you have an infinite +1/+1 counter that you can put on creatures. So he'd be pretty powerful in a couple of the decks that I'm building. Anyway. Interested to see. I didn't really look up this deck before buying it at the store. Interested to see what blue cards are in here. So looks like there's a playmat in there too. I don't think you much care to see the playmat, so we'll take these booster packs and move them yonder. And we'll get moving on this these War of the Spark booster packs, and then we can go through the deck itself. So, moving on to the first War of the Spark 15 card booster pack. As you can see, they got Teferi on the front there. First card in the War of the Spark booster pack is called Blind Blast. It costs 2 and a red to cast. It's an instant. Blind Blast deals 1 damage to target creature. That creature can't block this turn. Draw a card. Next is Battlefield Promotion. Costs 1 and a white to cast. It's an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains first strike until end of turn. You gain 2 life. Also probably a halfway decent card to include into my life gain Johnny Bridemaid deck. Next is Crush Descent. Costs 3 and a blue to cast. It's an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 mana. And then it has amass 2, put 2 +1/+1 counters on an army you control. If you don't control one, create a 0/0 black zombie army, creature token first. Next card is Chain Whip Cyclops, which costs 4 mana and a red to cast. Costs 3 and a red. It has an ability, it's a Cyclops warrior creature. Costs 3 mana, it has an ability that is 3 mana and 1 red. To cast, its target creature can't block this turn. It has 4 power and 4 toughness. Next is Return to Nature. Costs 1 and a green to cast. It's an instant. And you can choose one. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. Next is Shriek Diver. Costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a zombie bird warrior creature with flying. It has a 1 mana ability where Shriek Diver gains haste until end of turn. It has 2 power and 1 toughness. Next is Divine Arrow. Costs 1 and a white to cast. It's an instant. Divine Arrow deals 4 damage to target attacking creature or blocking creature. Next is Wall of Runes. Costs 1 blue mana to cast. It's a wall creature. It's a defender, so it can't attack. When Wall of Runes enters the battlefield, scry 1. The next card is Arlen's Wolf. Costs 2 and a green to cast. It's a wolf creature. Arlen's Wolf can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. It has 3 power and 2 toughness. Could be pretty annoying to play against. I might actually include that in my wolf deck. This creature can't be blocked, except by 2 or more creatures. When Iron Bully enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It has 1 power and 1 toughness. Next is Cyclops Electromancer. Costs 4 and 1 red to cast. It's a Cyclops wizard creature. When Cyclops Electromancer enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature and opponent controls, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. It has 4 power and 2 toughness. So probably pretty powerful in an aggro deck where you're running a lot of maybe shocks and lava coils and stuff. Could be pretty good, because if you've used a bunch, you could do quite a lot of damage. Next is Angrath's Rampage. Costs a black mana and a red mana to cast. It's a sorcery. Choose one. Target player sacrifices an artifact. Target player sacrifices a creature. Target player sacrifices a planeswalker. So you might be able to put your opponent in a pretty tough position if they have all 3 and they have to choose one to get rid of. Ooh, we just legendary planeswalker. I'm pumped. This is dope. Hotly, the Sun's Heart. Costs 2 and either a green or a white to cast. She's a legendary planeswalker. Each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. And she has a -3 loyalty ability where you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. She starts with 7 to begin with. It's a pretty interesting card. Next is Tomic, Distinguished Advocist. Costs 2 white mana to cast. He's a legendary creature, human advisor. He has flying, lands on the battlefield, and land cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. Your opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. He has 2 power and 3 toughness. It's a pretty good rare, and I'm gonna set both of those aside over here. Then the last 2 cards are a island basic land and a Zami army creature token. Alright, moving on to the last War of the Spark pack. So the first card we have in the last pack of this video is called Rising Populace. Costs 2 and a white to cast. It's a human creature. Whenever another creature or planeswalker you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Rising Populace. It has 2 power and 2 toughness. Next is Stealth Mission. Costs 2 and a blue to cast. It's a sorcery. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. That creature can't be blocked this turn. Next we have Snare Spinner. Costs 1 and a green to cast. It's a spider creature with reach. Whenever Spider Spinner blocks a creature with flying, whenever Snare Spinner blocks a creature with flying, Snare Spinner gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It has 1 power and 3 toughness. Next is Toll of the Invasion. Costs 2 and a black to cast. It's a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. And then Amass 1, which is, putting a +1/+1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control one, create a 0/0 black creature, black zombie army creature token first. It's a lot of words. Next we have Iron Bully. I think we got that in the other pack. Costs 3 mana. It's a golem artifact creature with menace. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. He has 1 power and 1 toughness. Next is Erratic Visionary. Costs 1 and a blue to cast. It's a human wizard creature. He has an ability where you pay 1 mana and 1 blue mana to draw a card and then discard a card. He has 1 power and 3 toughness. Next is Enforcer Griffin. Costs 4 and a white to cast. It's a griffin creature. It has flying. It has 3 power and 4 toughness. And a lot of flavor text. Next is Lazotep Reaver. Costs 1 and a black mana to cast. It's a zombie beast creature. When Lazotep Reaver enters the battlefield, amass 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on an army you control. If you don't control one, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. Black zombie army creature token. Say that 10 times fast. Okay. Black zombie army creature, black army. Oh, damn. Black zombie army creature, black zombie army. 1 power and 2 toughness. Next we have Demolish, which costs 3 and a red to cast. It's a sorcery. Destroy target artifact or land. Next is Law Rune Enforcer. Costs 1 white mana to cast. He's a human soldier creature. He has an ability where you pay 1 mana and tap him to tap a target creature with converted mana cost 2 or greater. He has 1 power and 2 toughness. Next we have Nissa's Triumph, which costs 2 green mana to cast. It's a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic forest cards. If you control a Nissa Planeswalker, instead search your library for up to 3 land cards. Reveal those cards, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. I actually have a couple Nissas in an elemental deck, so this might be worth putting in there. But next is Bond of Insight. Costs 3 and 1 blue mana to cast. It's a sorcery. Each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Return up to 2 instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then you exile Bond of Insight. Another legendary planeswalker. Nice. So, this is Jaya, Venerated Fire Mage. She costs 4 mana and 1 red to cast. Again, legendary planeswalker. If another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player instead. She has a -2 loyalty ability where Jaya, Venerated Fire Mage, deals 2 damage to any target. She starts with 5 loyalty counters. So she'd be, again, another great card for a red aggro deck, so I might want to get that, I think it was like the Electromancer. I might want to get him back out, and I'll put it off to the side. Next, we have Dreadhorde Anarchist, which costs 1 and 1 red mana to cast. It's a creature zombie wizard with trample. Whenever Dreadhorde Anarchist latest attacks, you may cast a target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to Dreadhorde Anarchist's power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So I feel like Thunderkin Awakener and this guy might be a pretty good combo. Because what you could do with Thunderkin Awakener, you can bring back a card from your graveyard to attack without paying its mana cost. And with him, when he attacks, you get to bring back a sorcery or instant card. So you could, when you attack with them, you also attack with, a creature card and a sorcerer instant from your graveyard, so you can get a ton of damage done. Anyway, the last two cards from the booster packs are a Plains basic land and a wizard token creature that has 2 power and 2 toughness. And now we are done with the packs. Moving on, let's just see if you want to continue hanging out here. We can see what's in this deck. I didn't look up the deck list before picking this up. Again, I just saw it in the shop and remembered that I needed Jace for one of the decks that I'm building. So let's see. So it has, and I'm not going to go through all the text on these because that would just take a lot of time. But I can just kind of do a quick run through of the cards in the deck. So we have Spark Double, might take too long. We have Spark Double, Bioessence Hydra, Jace's Ruse, another Jace's Ruse, Koira, Behemoth Beckoner, Legendary Planeswalker. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, and then a -1 ability, untap target permanent. She starts with 7, so that's actually a pretty good card. I'll get better, I promise. Koira's Dambreaker, another Koira's Dambreaker, 3 Blue Mulks, a Pollenbright Druid, another Pollenbright Druid, another Pollenbright Druid, a Primordial Worm, a Ward Scale Crocodile, another Ward Scale Crocodile, Merfolk Skydiver, another Merfolk Skydiver, Guild Pact Informant, another Guild Pact. I think we had 4 Guild Pact Informants. Jace's Protection, 3 Jace's Protections, 4 Simic Guild Gates, several island lands, several forest lands, and then we have a Jace's Triumph, 2 stealth missions, 2 Band Togethers, 2 Courage and Crises, and 2 New Horizons. It's going to be interesting, actually, to look at the, to check this deck out, because, I don't know, seems pretty interesting. I like Spark Double a lot. So yeah, and then, we have a couple, I think we have Magic Arena, card, and then, a couple other just random cards here. So that about does it for the video. So thanks everybody for joining along here and listening to me talk about these booster packs, and